Hello, everyone. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday and are feeling refreshed for the year ahead. I'm excited to bring you our first live stream of the year in partnership with Blue Yonder. We're going to be talking all about the future of fulfillment, and this is the perfect time to do it. We know that we don't have an easy road ahead, but there are a lot of learnings that we can take from 2020, and there are some exciting changes happening right now that we can really maximize the benefits of. We have some fascinating data from a survey Blue Yonder conducted in Q4 of last year, which is hot off the press, and we're going to really get into how we as an industry have responded to last year's challenges when it comes to fulfillment and how we plan to not only resolve them this year, but really grow as well. We'll be taking questions throughout our chat today on our live stream on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. So be sure to comment, send us your thoughts and questions, and we'll discuss as many as we can along the way. So a warm welcome to two of the leaders at Blue Yonder, JoAnn Martin, VP Industry Strategy and Market Development, and Jim Hall, Senior Industry Strategies Director. I'm excited to dive into this with you today. So why don't we kick things off by introducing yourself? Tell us who you are, what you do, and what's the one thing that might surprise people about the future of fulfillment? JoAnn.
Hi, everyone. I'm JoAnn Martin. I'm the Vice President of Industry Strategy at Blue Yonder. I spent most of my career in the retail industry, leading planning, allocation, and analytical teams. And at Blue Yonder, I lead our macro trends and industry strategy.
Awesome.
One of the things that I think is probably most surprising about fulfillment, sorry, forgot about that piece, was, I think fulfillment centers are going to be as pervasive as what storefronts have been. And I think we will continue to see an explosion, and that we will see new methods for customers to be able to engage with retailers and direct to consumers, because we're going to see that product be more accessible.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I know it's a really hot topic right now. Jim, over to you. Why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, what's the one thing that would surprise everybody?
Hi, Jim Hall. Thank you again. I am on JoAnn's team, so I head up the North American retail strategy, so very focused on the Northeast retail side. But I've been in industry for about 25 years, been with Blue Yonder for about 5 years. And one thing is just, I'm amazed that companies are actually starting to figure out how to set up and make deliveries without you even having to enter an address. So you think about drop lockers, pickup spots, things like that. Those are already becoming mainstream. But I actually foresee a future where you can provide limited real-time access to your actual in-time location and just meet the delivery driver, and they'll do the handoff. The technology is actually already there, and it's really just a matter of figuring out the security side of it.
What? I mean, that's just crazy. I cannot wait to get into this research. I've been telling everybody about this live event because I think that obviously we've seen a lot of changes in 2020 when it comes to fulfillment and, everything that's going to be happening around distribution and micro warehousing and getting closer to the customer and what all of that looks like for everybody. So let's dive in. Let's start with a bit of context for the discussion that we're going to be having today. So JoAnn, over to you. Why don't you paint us a picture of traditional fulfillment versus modern fulfillment, and what are really the key differences there?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, look, fulfillment has come a long way from where it started. And when you think about kind of a traditional fulfillment methodology, it was very linear. In fact, it went from manufacturer to distribution center to store and then to customer. And now that has completely changed in the complexity of what modern fulfillment has become. With the expansion of online, but even before the expansion of online, we saw the customer engaging differently with retailers, which caused retailers to respond in much different ways from a fulfillment and manufacturers as well. So when you think about how processing, no longer are you processing individual items or packs per se, you're packaging in bulks and pallets. And there's much different needs within the distribution center. You're also managing speed to market concerns of consumers. Consumers no longer want to wait. So having proximity of product, being able to process, not to mention the fact that you've got all of the automation, the robotics, and different factors within the warehousing system that has kind of helped you from a modern fulfillment. It helps to drive efficiency, it helps to drive automation, and it helps to drive speed to market ultimately to the consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought all of those up because they're obviously really hot topics of what people are discussing when it comes to their fulfillment right now. One of the things that I wanted to ask you before we get into it is because I'm hearing a lot more about dark stores, and we might be getting into this a little bit later. But what is a dark store?
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about dark stores and because we have some of that in our survey results too. But a dark store, think of it as a store that's literally gone dark. As a fulfillment center, it's a repurposed store. And so what it allows you to do is leverage some of the assets that you have within your network and be able to use them as fulfillment for customers. So it really helps you to localize that distribution and that fulfillment, and allows them to process and have more agility within their supply chain to be able to process quickly online orders or areas within zip codes. So it's become actually a very scrappy way of retailers being able to respond to the online demand in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and repurpose what we're looking at as far as bricks and mortar, in 2021, because obviously a lot of that has changed. There's a lot of bricks and mortar out there. And what do you do with it? If we can't go back to in store and we can't go back to, and we're doing a lot more online, how do we repurpose that? And I can't wait to get into that because I think it's absolutely fascinating. So JoAnn, let me ask you, do you think the change is entirely driven by e-commerce? I mean, obviously that's something that people are saying is that it is entirely driven by e-commerce, but are there any other considerations we have to credit for the evolution of the modern fulfillment that we're seeing today?
Sure, of course. Look, I mean, you can't talk about modern fulfillment without giving a nod to the Amazon effect that's been out there for a long time. And their decentralized distribution, their speed to market, their ability to fulfill orders at a level that we haven't seen many companies be able to embrace given the mega marketplaces. So I would say that the Amazon effect has also been a catalyst, but that does lean towards online. I mean, online in general has been the underlying foundational piece, which has caused this seismic shift. But Amazon really took it to another level, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. And it, up to all of our expectations. I mean,
Yeah.
I think COVID has kind of curbed some of those expectations because I know for me, a lot of orders in 2020 took a little bit longer than they traditionally would have. And that's really the cascading effect of what's happened on the manufacturing side overseas when things were closed. And we've sort of seen that effect all through 2020. So I'm glad that you brought that out. And there's no doubt that modern fulfillment is demanding, right, and complex. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, you recently carried out a survey on the future of fulfillment. So do you want to just let us know a bit about that? Who did you speak to, and what was the aim of the survey? Before we can continue, we can give a little bit of context around the research that you've done.
Oh, sure. I'll take that one. So we actually partnered with ResearchScape to do the survey. We polled about 300 retail and e-commerce senior executives. These are executives that actually had responsibility in the logistics and fulfillment space. So they actually either run or responsible for operations in this specific fulfillment space within retail. And the responses were incredibly detailed, I have to say. We got a lot of information, a lot of great feedback from our customers and the respondents, and so much so that we actually released the results in 2 phases. Phase 1 we released back in December, which is available up on our website if anybody wants to see that. Today we released the second of the 2 phases.
Awesome. And I think we're going to have the link in comments, at least to the second set. And then on the ticker today, we also have a link to Blue Yonder's website so that you can go and check out some of those research findings as well. For anybody who is joining us on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, make sure that you pose your questions. We are going to be taking questions throughout this event, and we're going to be addressing those at the end. So make sure that you comment with any questions that you might have based on the conversation that we're having today around fulfillment. So the survey highlighted some key challenges that retailers are facing right now. And there's no surprise that they're pretty much COVID specific, right? So why don't we take a closer look at that, Jim? Why don't we talk about some of those key challenges and what it's meant through the research that you've done?
Oh, you bet. The challenges that came out, and it's interesting, and you've seen some of this in the articles that are out there, but the COVID impact really is accelerating trends that we've already been seeing in the retail space. Sort of what JoAnn was talking about, trying to get delivery faster, delivery cheaper, delivery closer to the customer. But all of that is coming in increased costs. And with what happened on March and the shutdowns, and suddenly everybody working remote and being remote and trying to shop remote, companies had to pivot quickly. And some of them were on a really solid e-com footing, and I would say those are some of the companies that did well. But others just kind of had to slap it together, and they did so in order to meet their customers' needs. But they're seeing much higher fulfillment costs. They just didn't have the infrastructure and the technology in place to make it work, and so they're really band-aiding it and forcing it through. That, of course, was exacerbated by things like supply shortages, the maintaining social distances. There was an interesting comment that we had that one company had to deal with all three at the same time. They had the triple impact of product shortages, worker shortages, and social distancing. And so they figured out a way, but they ended up having to go into extra space, really trying to manage all those pieces. They felt the pain. So the survey hit a lot of the key points that are concerns out there in retail fulfillment today. And the really interesting thing is there's a nice line you can draw between the challenges that the respondents were describing and some of the responses that they're doing. So some of those underlying activities that they're taking trace right back to these really core challenges that came up as a result of the COVID disruption and crisis.
Okay, so we can actually see some of the key ways that people are actually putting into place. And I know we're going to be talking about some of those solutions, but also some of the things to think about when we think about social distancing, right? When we think about a distribution center and we think about how we've had to make some of those changes around social distancing and obviously with masks and things like that. Another thing that has come up through 2020 for me was how to handle that with drivers. Right? Because drivers come to the facility and they generally go to the office, they get some paperwork, they go and they submit the paperwork to the person in the warehouse, and the warehouse is filling the truck. Is that something that came up in some of your survey results, was how to really manage not only inside the DC, but also the external factors of the drivers showing up and how that was going to change as well?
Yeah, we did see some embedded in the research, and probably the best way I can describe it is somebody used the paraphrase of you get a delivery at home, right? And you're now looking at contactless pickup and contactless delivery at home. Mm-hmm. That plays all the way back through the supply chain. So when the driver picked up that product, when the driver received it from the picker, even all the way back to when it was delivered from the vendor to the distribution center, all of those handoff pieces now had to be managed as near contactless as you can. So it increased time because now you've got a lot of cleaning. You've got companies having to now swap through literally dozens and hundreds of gloves that individual workers are putting on as they move through. It's the ripple effects were felt all the way to the manufacturers, through the delivery to the warehouses and out to that final mile delivery. So yeah, it's quite the ripple effects.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And I had to ask that because that was one of the more fascinating discussions that I had last year was, hey, what are we going to do around the drivers, and how do we keep everybody safe, and how do we, manage everybody and move everybody around and obviously do that with time in mind as well, right? Because we don't want to delay the picking. We don't want to delay the product being put on the truck. We don't want to delay the product being delivered, because not only does that affect the supply chain, but it also affects customer experience. as well, which everybody is fighting for right now. So we've really set the scene, right? And I'm sure those challenges that you had mentioned previously, Jim, will be pretty familiar to a lot of our listeners. And it might be a new year, but we are very much still operating in the shadow of COVID. So, JoAnn, what do those challenges mean for logistics this coming year? Maybe this is a question for both Jim and JoAnn. Your survey highlighted some key priorities in those three core areas. And I think it would be great if you could share some of those stats that came out of the research with us. I think the first one is around expanding existing capacity and productivity top list of fulfillment priorities.
Sure. And I think you nailed it. And that's one of the most exciting pieces when we surveyed about what is the biggest fulfillment priority that we have right now. Over 43% said it was expanding existing capacities, and really, really close to that was labor productivity. So top of mind from a fulfillment priority standpoint is really about capacity. And it's not a surprise when you look at the explosion that we've had and the changes in processes that we've had within the industry and the need to be able to drive this online volume through. You talked about delays at Christmas time with packaging, and that's not uncommon, right? So the network design and being able to expand and build out that capacity, it's not quite there yet. And so that's where a lot of our survey respondents responded to, which was not a surprise, but very encouraging for us. And then, of course, not to be forgotten was just overall their processing and efficiency. So picking processes and labor productivity. How am I managing my labor? There was scarcity of labor for a long time, and trying to figure out how am I going to process through the distribution center. So 42% really prioritize labor productivity. And that's really making the most of what you have to a certain degree, which is very encouraging and really kind of making those jobs really efficient. But one of the facts and one of the sound bites I don't want to get lost when you look at fulfillment priorities is 38% said reducing warehouse costs and DC costs. And that will continue to be a conversation, I think, through the balance of the year, if not forever, talking about online is not a cheap endeavor and fulfillment costs are not cheap. So that major shift to online has caused many companies to rethink their operations, their capacity, their overhead, and squeezing every dime out of the supply chain to be able to drive to cost efficiencies, to be able to offset some of that cost that's being incurred today.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And those are some interesting numbers. And we're going to get into a few more as well. But I think you're right. I think, 2020 is that year of transition where we go from bricks and mortar to online. How do we do that? What does that look like? We just need to get it online because we need to get it out. And so the priority around some of those costs are reduced, until we get to a point where we can sit down and really take a look at that and change the way we're thinking and change the way that we're doing and change the way those processes will look like. And so it's interesting that that's 38%. And that's quite a high number considering how many people and companies actually did that transition in 2020.
Agreed. And definitely a major focus, and will continue there.
Yeah. Awesome. So what about improving pricing decisions to elevate customer experience? I mean, I say this all the time. Supply chain is very, very closely tied to customer experience. The distribution, the last mile delivery, the packaging, everything is rooted in a return customer from that customer experience that you're providing to them. So what was the research findings from that?
Now, 100%, when you look at customer experience and where they were prioritizing, 48% said pricing and promotion. And when you think about that, that is pivotal to the customer experience, but also 36% from an assortment management. So customer behavior has dramatically changed throughout this past year. Their desire to drive towards more comfy, cozy. We all feel that, right? We have, a lot of tops to bottoms ratios have been thrown out the window from historical standpoints. So how people are managing that customer experience, taking a look at their assortment management, how are they managing it? How are they getting it to the customer How are they leveraging data to be able to localize those assortments from a fulfillment standpoint? And then how are they pricing and promoting their products for profit? And it all goes back to that cost to serve and how it ties together, because pricing can disenchant as well as enchant a customer the same. The last thing you want is a customer to be in store, to look on a mobile device and see a price that's lower on a website than you see in a store. So really being able to manage that customer experience and kind of drive those in tandem is going to be very important over the next year or
And
so.
yeah, and that's so true. I mean, you see it all the time. You see people going to bricks and mortar stores and then, taking a look at online to see what the pricing is and how do you manage that. So I like the fact that you brought that up within the pricing and promotion. I mean, obviously at 48%, it's a huge part of what people are looking at when it comes to customer experience. I think what was also interesting is the 38% workforce management, because we all know we can't get anything done without the right people in the right positions to be able to help make that happen, from the drivers to, and maybe those are also the delivery people, right? So the delivery people,
Yeah.
the drivers, the people within the DC that are picking and making sure that, that packaging looks really good so that when the customer receives it, it's a whole event.
100%. And another place in where workforce is going to come into play is in stores where they're fulfilling orders as well. So that's become another node within your supply chain, with a lot of the omni fulfillment coming from stores as well. So workforce management is definitely going to be a focus of how do I reskill my labor? How do I transition some of the roles and responsibilities? And how do I drive that productivity?
Yeah, especially when you bring in technology, AI, the robotics that you were talking
Yeah.
about earlier. How do we make that transition? Because there's still, a lot of that workforce that we need to help drive that customer experience and help drive some of the core functions of that DC. And so I think you're right. And it's not surprising that it's at that percentage.
No, it's not. And, robotics is meant to augment workforce and be able to enhance it and allow workers to focus on some of the enhanced tasks that robotics can't do. So I think that when you look at the scarcity of labor that we had, robotics is going to help us to drive to the capacity numbers that we need to, while we're focusing on workforce and the skilled labor as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just for everybody in the audience, I do see some of your questions, and we are going to take those at the end of the conversation. So, I just want to let you know that I do see those, and we will be addressing those. If you have any questions, make sure to put those in the comments, and we're definitely going to get to those at the end of the conversation. So, now moving through the survey results, one of the other interesting things that I think we want to highlight in this live stream today is the automation of logistics networks and the usage of modern fulfillment options and how those are going to grow. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because some of those percentages and some of the things that we're going to get into are going to be very, very interesting to the audience today.
Absolutely. As we discussed a little bit earlier, we talked about how everything is shifting and how people have really kind of made different decisions. So when you think about automation, about 14% right now today of our respondents believe they have full automation. Over the next 12 months, to show that progression, 21%. So we're going from 14 to 21%, which is significant. So the recognition of being able to get to that speed and leveraging automation, whether it be through AI or whether it be through robotics, that is definitely top of mind. But not only that, is we're seeing the networks also change. So when you think about micro fulfillment and localizing, pop-up DCs, we're seeing that double, more than double going into next year, where people are expecting to go from 12 to 26% of pop-up DCs. So that can be anything from a micro fulfillment center to potentially a regionalized distribution center. But again, think about the other soundbite that we had that was tied to capacity, and that being one of the major fulfillment priorities. It doesn't surprise me that they would be moving from 12 to 26, though that number is pretty dramatic and a really significant jump. Micro fulfillment alone is going from 15 to 27%. So when you think about it, that's huge. And that lends itself to the trend that we saw within the grocery sector, which is where you see a lot of the micro fulfillment explosion between CPG and direct to consumer. So right in line with where the industry is, and really is a nod to kind of that explosive growth there. And then last but not least, and a topic we just talked about a little bit, was dark stores. I mean, dark stores have only been about 6% of kind of the composition. And through the survey, we see that retailers are looking to jump that to 12%, which means they're looking to double that presence. So it all lends itself to the expansion of capacity that we've seen, and the number one priority in which they continue to flag.
Well, and I think that these numbers are some of the most important, I would assume, to the listeners and some of the audience members today. Because if you're in fulfillment, or obviously fulfillment is part of your supply chain strategy, this is where your survey results are going to make all of the difference and give them an idea of where they need to focus on for 2021.
I would absolutely agree. The survey was very clear that it was about capacity and efficiency. And all of these survey results, the doubling of some of these concepts, whether it be a pop-up DC or micro-fulfillment, they really kind of dovetail very nicely into those overriding concepts. So they are the major focus, and it's very clear where everybody is investing and focusing, both from a technology standpoint as well as from just an overall capacity standpoint.
Yeah, and think about it on the services side, right? So if you're providing fulfillment for retail or CPG or another industry, they're expecting you to have full automation. If you don't have full automation right now, it's definitely something that needs to be in your purview for 2021. And then if you think about also taking a look at square footage as far as your fulfillment footprint, right? We're now not looking at huge and very large DCs. We're looking at smaller DCs positioned in particular locations to be able to handle that last mile delivery and give the best customer experience.
100%. And, that kind of ties to all of the initiatives we see on demand forecasting and AI and ML, because people are trying to figure out which products go into these micro DCs, as you say, or regionalized DCs to be able to service those customers. So assortment curation and fulfillment are going hand in hand with personalization from a customer centricity standpoint.
Awesome. So now we've gone through the priorities from the survey. Let's talk about how we're going to make that happen. So let's start with dark stores. Jim, can you explain to us, I mean, we already kind of know what that means, but what are the benefits of dark stores?
I love talking about dark stores. I truly see it as the convergence of retail. So over the last, call it 10, 12 years, retail's been going through, fundamental changes, e-com, online delivery, pickup, buy online, pick up in store, buy online, pick up at curb. Dark stores, again, just to describe, essentially, studies have shown that there's probably 20, 30, 40% too many stores in the United States. We know that we're overstored. We know that there, was going to have to be a right sizing at some point. And so retailers are going through that right now, trying to figure out what are their most efficient stores and getting out of the stores that don't make sense, which becomes a dark store. One way to use that empty retail space is you just convert it to a fulfillment center. Basically, it becomes a little mini fulfillment center. You can, fully automate it, partially automate it, or make it just a very manual. But you can use that space as a in-market fulfillment center where you take your highest moving items that are selling within this particular market, you pre-position them at this dark store, and you put some effort against some form of workforce that then goes in, picks against that, and either picks orders for pickup, picks orders for drop off at a pickup locker or something like that, or even hands it off to an in-market delivery like a Uber delivery or one of the other 3PL delivery stations out there. So really interesting. They all have, these dark stores have the infrastructure like electricity, back doors, so you can actually bring in delivery trucks, things like that. So they're actually pretty well set up. A few really interesting things that come out when you start thinking about it, kind of that next level of convergence. Some of the mall owners, like Simon, are actually starting to get into this space. So now, they have all these empty storefronts in their malls. They have access to highways that are right off of the mall property. They're starting to get into this dark store fulfillment play. And a really interesting thought puzzle I'll put out there to all the folks listening is you think about a retailer that uses their dark store for fulfillment in market, and you think about the Amazon to-go store where you walk in and you pick up your product off the shelf and you walk out. There's actually not a whole lot of difference there. The only difference is a retail employee doing the pickup or you doing the pickup. But other than that, it's pre-positioning product in market so somebody can go in, pick an order, and walk out the door with it. So really interesting implications. It also is really starting to blur. I love this finding. A lot of zoning calls on retail is very different than light industrial. What is a dark store fulfillment center? Is it retail or is it light industrial now? So over the next 12, 24 months, I think there's going to be a lot of fallout of implications as we really start to understand what this future fulfillment looks like. And it's just going to be an exciting time to be in retail.
Yeah, and that's a great question, right? And I think the other thing that is amazing that comes out of what you just said is we've got new DC players that we never thought would be in the distribution space. So look out.
Exactly. And they have very deep pockets.
That's right. And like you said, they're very well positioned off the highway and they have some very prime real estate. So that is extremely interesting. I've also done I've also highlighted some articles over the last couple of months about like robomarts and different things like that. And, those are just in beta test, but they're definitely coming and things that we're going to see more about coming up. So speaking of that, JoAnn, going over to you as far as automation, how are retailers going to increase that? What are the solutions and the technologies that they'll be looking to integrate? And also, is there something at Blue Yonder that that you guys are doing to really help with facilitate some of these solutions?
Sure, absolutely. Automation is top of mind, and being able to figure out how to drive that efficiency. Our platform helps to enable that for us. When you think about kind of what is the overriding fact that drives it, it's end-to-end visibility across the supply chain. And that is the first place where you have to start, is that you have to be able to understand where your product is, when it will arrive, and not just typical estimated times of arrival, but having AI and ML capability that allows you to predict your times of arrival. When you see things such as containers on docks and, ships that are going slower or faster, depending on storms and impacts of weather, trying to understand where your goods are. So I think automation starts by having end-to-end visibility. It also is helpful to understand, and one of the things from an automation is exception-based management. So having the ability, and we have the ability within our control tower to be able to detect disruptions as they're happening, to be able to impact our supply chain and provide recommendations of actions to take. And that's critical when you think about being able to self-heal your supply chains, if you will, being able to understand and automate and get to a more autonomous supply chain that's running with exception-based management. So that's going to be critical. And then it can go all the way into, once you have the visibility, the actual processing within the distribution themselves. We talked a little bit about robotics and being able to automate and augment, but it can go back as far as being able to leverage AI and machine learning for better demand forecasts that help to inform a lot of your transportation and your warehouse management, which will influence your workforce management. So having one common demand forecast that has predictive analytics with a probabilistic forecast is something that we're very focused on to help retailers connect that supply chain end to end and make sure that on a platform, they're able to see the demand through their workforce and everything is running synergistically together.
Awesome. And I love that response. And, obviously there's so much to do, right? So supply chain professionals really need to have a place to be able to go to really implement some of these solutions. I mean, if we're talking about doubling those percentages within 12 months, that is not a lot of time when you think about it. So just so everybody knows with the questions, we're going to be taking those in about just a couple of minutes. So just hang on, and we're going to be answering those questions very, very soon. But let's talk about the benefits of these changes. So JoAnn, what are the opportunities that modern fulfillment is going to bring over the next year?
I think we have the potential to delight customers and to be able to drive some customer loyalty. When you can figure out what your customers are demanding and harness a lot of that data and leverage it within the supply chains are going to be the catalyst to deliver that customer satisfaction. So processing time, and that lends itself to processing time, to delivery options and methodology and flexibility. So being able to get the product to the customer, I think, is going to be the key thing that we're going to see over the next year. I also think that as we continue to evolve and we continue to understand the demand, we will be able to drive cost efficiencies within the supply chain. And we will be able to hit a level of scale in which it is no longer a cost center, but a profit center, and something that retailers are going to be able to leverage.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm glad that you said that. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the last question that I have for you until after we have done the audience questions. So Nairobi says, "Hi guys, awesome topic. I'd like to know, how is the fulfillment and retail industry being impacted by the container scarcity in Asia, the carriers' blank sailings, and the high rates we have been seeing in the last months?" So I'm not sure who wants to take that, but I think that that's a wonderful question, especially where there's so much talk around capacity and so many challenges right now.
Yeah, I'll take a first shot at that. Yep, no problem. But excellent question. Absolutely correct. Container scarcity is absolutely a challenge. There's an interesting undercurrent going on right now in the fulfillment space, talking about offshore, onshore, and nearshoring. And so the carriers are attempting to guess the future by trying to figure out where to put these containers. And so I would say what we will see is there's been a peel back a bit on soft lines, especially. This time last year, they weren't sure. They were starting to place orders for this summer. And so I think what we're ultimately going to see is we saw the shortages and supply disruptions pretty quickly on the stuff that was relatively low lead times. And so, the paper towels and the toilet papers and some of that stuff. I think we're just now going to start to feel the impacts of those longer range decisions that were taken last March, last April, last May. And that combined with the carrier shortages and the container shortages, I do think we're going to see some interesting shortages and some, last season product out there as we come into this spring and summer, which will, again, just take a little bit more time to flush through.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I want to give a bit of an example. So I ordered a couch in August and I only got it delivered mid-December. Just to give everybody an idea. And I'm sure there are 100 stories like that out there, but just from a personal experience, that's kind of what I've seen from, obviously, the capacity issues, the manufacturing issues, like you said, that started in March and April. And I think we're going to continue to see that, right? Because we've got Chinese New Year. We haven't even gotten past Chinese New Year yet. Yep. And so we're going to continue to see some of those capacity issues. So great question, Nairobi. Thank you so much for asking that question. Now, I know Peter has left, but I do want to ask his question because he is going to come back and watch the replay afterwards. So Peter asks, what are your thoughts on the reverse logistics that has also jumped significantly with the uplift in online sales, which is also a really great question. So who wants to take that one?
I'll take it. Reverse logistics is going to be a way of life for us, right? Especially with the jump. When you think about the return rates that we've historically seen on, let's just talk apparel, which is where they're the highest in like the 35% range, around there, you'll see high return rates. And so we have to be able to factor in reverse logistics and being able to put that product back online. And it's definitely been a challenge and something that retailers have been focused on. And though we're working on the reverse logistics, I'm also seeing retailers start to work on the front end on how they minimize the returns to start to mitigate some of the need for the reverse logistics. So being able to put better descriptions online and focus on some of their online platforms to minimize some of those returns coming back. Because the reality is even as efficient as you can be with reverse logistic, it does take your inventory out of circulation and productivity. And so people are trying to minimize reverse logistics by shifting it more towards the front end and try to prevent the returns from happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a great answer to that question. And I think more and more people are offering returns, right?
Without a doubt.
Go ahead.
And they're offering them in multi-channels, right? So that they can repurpose them quicker onto stores. So a lot of people are using stores. Amazon's using Kohl's. So there's a lot of on location to try to get the product as quickly as possible back into distribution.
Absolutely. All right, Crystal, will there be an increase in scan locker pickup facilities?
Sure, I'll take that one. And the short answer is yes. It's going to be interesting, the variance that we're going to see. Right now, I think there's probably just a couple of models where the pickup lockers are either co-located with the retailer or co-located with the retailer partner, like a FedEx or a UPS. I think we're going to start to see these become even more ubiquitous out in hotel lobbies, apartment complexes, post offices. I think we're going to start to see these pickup lockers popping up in a lot of different places, and include like the Crystal was saying, it's going to be a scan. So you actually you walk up, you scan a particular barcode, the door unlocks, you take your stuff, and you walk away. Even to the point where at some point we will, at least a portion of us, will get back to a commute. You might even start to see these in larger industrial office areas where you have 10 or 12 office buildings in a space. They'll just have a local pickup locker, and it might be for online orders from food to Amazon to who knows what. It can just be dropped off, and there'll be specially there'll be some that'll be refrigerated and some that'll be frozen. And so yes, I think there's definitely a trend there, and it's just going to continue to accelerate.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, even for online deliveries, I mean, my parents never got their groceries delivered until halfway through or the beginning parts of 2020. And now it's almost like they won't even go back. And so I think we're going to see a pickup in or an uptick in all of the different ways, right? Like ordering something online, being able to pick it up at your local store as well. So that was a great question. Thank you, Crystal. And this is from a LinkedIn user. I'm sorry, I don't know what your name is because it didn't come through. But the question is, I'm curious how robotics can help along the supply chain and how technology can help drive efficiency for companies. Where are the best places to automate the fulfillment operations?
Sure, absolutely. I can talk a little bit about that. So from a robotic standpoint, when you think about where it's probably used best, it's in places where there's repetitive and easy to replicate tasks. So in picking of distribution to be able to package, in labeling, in places where you can augment a repetitive task is probably the best place in which it is going to help to allow you to repurpose your workforce. And it's going to drive the ability to be able to leverage them in different manners and be able to drive efficiencies and minimize costs.
Awesome. I love that. I hope that answered all of your questions. If anybody else has any other questions, we do have a couple of minutes. But the last question that I have for you two, are we going to see these trends continue after 2021? Maybe you both want to weigh in on these trends and also let us know what's maybe the one thing people should concentrate on in 2021.
Sure. How about I'll go first? There's a lot of uncertainty, without a doubt. These trends are going to continue. Interesting on our previous conversation where we started to talk about new players in the supply chain space. Within the retailer, you're also starting to think about supply chain differently. I've been in supply chain for 30 years. When I started, it didn't, supply chain was not something you talked about. It was just people moving boxes. But now if you think and think about supply chain within a retailer, it includes merchandising. It includes the store operation. It includes, of course, warehousing and transportation, but it also includes the planners that sit behind that in finance. And so all these pieces have to come together. And as JoAnn described, the best way to react to that is to actually have this intelligent, resilient supply chain where you take advanced technology, you embed it where it makes sense, and then you train and empower your team to cover those places that you're not going to automate. And between those two, you can actually be proactive, predictive, and actually truly get to customer-centric.
Yeah. And I would agree. I think we're just at the beginning of the journey right now. When you think about the level in which we're looking at, based off of the survey, 21% moving towards automation, that still leaves a significant amount of improvement. So I think that this is only going to accelerate. And I think if there's anything we learned from last year is the need for automation and technology and smart technology to be able to drive the supply chain. It's only going to continue, and it's going to continue to evolve. So will it look like this next year? Maybe not. But will it continue to accelerate and drive efficiencies? Yes. And I think the quest to figure out the balance between online and in-store fulfillment to be able to manage costs is only going to continue to intensify as a need to be able to continue to drive profitability for retailers.
Absolutely. So if there was one piece of advice, one thing that people should focus on, what would you let the audience know before we go?
You want to go first, Joann?
I can start. So my piece of advice would be to have a strong understanding and visibility to your supply chain, understanding where your inventory is and truly understanding your network and the disruptions, and having that technological advancement to be able to anticipate challenges and proactively address them is going to be critical as a competitive advantage.
And I guess my best recommendation would be, if you have not yet laid out a plan for your supply chain for the next 3 to 5 years, do it now. You're already behind the curve. Supply chains are big. Supply chains underpin all of retail, and they are like steering an aircraft carrier. They move slowly, but once they get momentum, they're incredibly powerful. So the sooner you can start thinking about it and actually lay out that plan and start to get the supply chain focused on the customer, interconnected and collaborative, ultimately it can become your strategic competitive advantage. But in order to do that, you have to actually start taking that first step on the journey.
So much great advice. Thank you so much to JoAnn and Jim for joining me today. You know, the future of fulfillment, it's a big topic, but I loved getting an insight through your survey into what the industry is thinking as a whole. You know, what they're prioritizing. It always helps to be able to benchmark your own priorities. And it was really exciting to talk about an area in logistics, which really is adapting quickly to what is thrown at it. And as we've seen in 2020, I can't wait to see what this year brings, especially with some of those percentages and those numbers and the doubling of what we are going to see in 2021. So to find out more about Blue Yonder and how they could help your business, head over to their website. We've included that in the ticker of this event. So please go and check them out. We've also included JoAnn's and Jim's LinkedIn, links to their LinkedIn. So go ahead and connect with them if you have any other questions as well. Thank you guys so much for joining me today on this live event. I think that it was incredible, and the amount of information is just so amazing.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate everybody.